The autumn air at the Caldwell Vineyard estate was crisp, smelling of wine grapes on the cusp of decay and money so old it had composted into an invisible yet palpable layer of power. For Olivia Matthews, it smelled like a trap, a beautifully decorated, exquisitely cared trap. As the chief financial officer who had taken Matthews Construction from a respectable regional player to a dominant force in the Northeast, she understood value, assets, and liabilities. And as she looked out over the rolling hills, watching the union of her charismatic brother, Jason, and the impeccably polished Vanessa Caldwell, she knew her family had just made a deal that felt profoundly, fundamentally unsound. The problem was, she was an asset they seemed increasingly eager to write off. The slights had been accumulating for months, a slow drip of acid eroding the fraying bonds of family loyalty. It began at the engagement party, hosted at the Caldwell sprawling waterfront mansion, a place that made the comfortable Matthews family home look like a groundskeeper's cottage. Olivia had worn a tasteful, expensive navy blue dress, feeling confident until Vanessa's mother, Caroline, had swept her gaze up and down and remarked, with a voice like honey laced with arsenic, "Oh, Olivia, how professional you look. It's so brave of you to dedicate your entire life to work." The implication was clear. She was a drab workhorse in a field of elegant show ponies. Then came the wedding planning, a masterclass in strategic exclusion. When Olivia, who managed nine-figure budgets and complex project timelines for a living, offered to help, Vanessa had smiled sweetly. "That's so thoughtful, but we have professionals for that. You must be so busy with your spreadsheets." Yet those same spreadsheets were evidently no obstacle when Vanessa needed something. Her calls would interrupt crucial budget meetings, her tone casual, demanding. "Olivia, darling, Jason mentioned a family cabin on some lake with a funny name. We need a photo for the rehearsal dinner slideshow. You're so good with those little details." Little details. Our childhood, Olivia thought bitterly, reduced to a prop for her perfect wedding narrative. The rehearsal dinner itself, held at an exclusive country club, had been the dress rehearsal for her humiliation. Her father, Thomas, had cornered her by the bar. He looked tired, the skin around his eyes thinner than she'd ever seen it, his usual vigor dimmed by a private battle he refused to name. "Liv," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need you to be on your best behavior this weekend. No talk of profit margins or material costs. Just smile. The Caldwells are a different breed. This alliance is crucial." "An alliance, Dad, or an acquisition?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. His eyes, once full of fire, now held a deep, weary defensiveness. "Jason is building a bridge to our future. It's time you learn to appreciate the architecture instead of questioning the materials." He had walked away, leaving her with the distinct feeling that he wasn't just asking her to be polite, he was asking her to be blind. Later that evening, Richard Caldwell, a man who moved with the predatory grace of a shark in a tailored suit, had clapped a heavy hand on her shoulder. "The little numbers whiz," he boomed, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Jason tells me you keep the lights on. Don't you worry, once we get our families properly merged, we'll find a nice, quiet corner for you to continue your work." A quiet corner. The words echoed the break room at the office, the place where you put things you didn't want to look at. Now on the wedding day itself, the final performance had begun. Olivia had been omitted from the bridal party. "We're keeping it small, just my absolute closest," Vanessa had explained, a lie so blatant it was insulting, considering the 12 bridesmaids who floated down the aisle. Olivia had spent the morning alone in her hotel room, meticulously applying her makeup, choosing a stunning burgundy gown that was elegant and appropriate, a silent act of defiance.
She would not look like a drab workhorse today. When she arrived at the vineyard, she was intercepted not by family, but by a frantic wedding planner with a clipboard and a perpetual frown. "Oh, thank God you're here," the woman had said, mistaking her for an assistant. When she corrected her, the planner's eyes widened for a second before a mask of professional condescension slid into place. "Right, Olivia Matthews. Caroline Caldwell mentioned you were excellent in a crisis. We have one. The string quartet is refusing to play Pachelbel's canon, some artistic disagreement, and the vegan canapes have been cross-contaminated with dairy. Can you handle it?" It was a deliberate, calculated insult, a menial task designed to reinforce her status. For a moment, Olivia was tempted to tell the woman precisely where she could put her canapes. But then she thought of her father, of his desperate plea to keep the peace. So she handled it. She spent the next hour, the hour of family photos and champagne toasts in the bridal suite, negotiating with a petulant cellist and calming a furious caterer. By the time she was done, the guests were already being seated for the ceremony. She found her mother fussing with the floral arrangements near the entrance. "There you are," Margaret said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Where have you been? The photos are done. You missed them." "I was helping," Olivia said, the word tasting like ash. "Helping? Olivia, your only job today was to be the sister of the groom, honestly." Her assigned seat was in the 8th row, tucked behind a pillar, far from her parents in the front row. The family section, where she should have been, was occupied by Jason's college roommate and his wife. As Jason took his place at the altar, he caught her eye. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, a gesture of helpless apology, before turning his attention to his luminous bride. In that moment, Olivia felt a pang of genuine sorrow, not for herself, but for the brother she was losing, the boy who used to share his secrets with her, now a man who couldn't even save her a seat. The reception was held in the estate's grand barrel room, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings and the rich earthy scent of aging wine. Hundreds of candles cast a warm golden glow, and the air buzzed with the clinking of crystal and the murmur of quiet power brokering. Olivia plastered a smile on her face, a carefully constructed mask of pleasant indifference, and navigated the cocktail hour. She endured the subtle, probing questions from Caldwell relatives. "Matthews Construction. My husband uses you for his commercial properties. You must be in marketing, yes? A pretty face like yours." "I'm the CFO." "CFO? Good for you," he said, his tone suggesting it was a cute hobby, like macrame, before turning away to greet a senator. She moved through the crowd, a ghost at her own family celebration. When the chimes finally called them to dinner, she felt a wave of relief. She could sit, eat her salmon, and retreat into her own thoughts. She found the main seating chart, a massive, ornate board swathed in silk flowers, and scanned the elegant calligraphy for her name. Table 1, the head table, was the bride and groom. Table 2 held her parents and the Caldwells. Tables 3 through 10 were filled with a mix of important family and influential guests. Her name wasn't there. She checked again, her heart beginning to beat a heavy, painful rhythm against her ribs. Maybe a misprint? An oversight? A waiter, noticing her confusion, approached. "May I help you, miss?" "I'm looking for my table. Olivia Matthews." He frowned, then consulted a smaller, dog-eared list he pulled from its pocket, the staff list. His eyes widened slightly. "Ah, yes, Miss Matthews. You're seated in the kitchen annex. This way, please." The kitchen annex. The words hung in the air, clinical and cold. He led her away from the golden light of the ballroom, away from the music and laughter, through a swinging door marked staff only. The atmosphere changed instantly. The warm glow was replaced by harsh fluorescent light. The scent of wine and perfume was overwhelmed by the smells of sizzling butter and disinfectant. The murmur of conversation became the clang of pots and the barked orders of the head chef. He guided her past the main kitchen, a chaotic ballet of white-coated figures, and into a small, sterile side room. It was a break room. A few stacked chairs leaned against one wall, and a large coffee machine gurgled in the corner. In the center of the room, a single, small, bare round table had been set up. A lone place card sat upon it, Olivia Matthews. The wedding planner was already there, hunched over a plate, scrolling through her phone. The lead photographer's assistant was shoveling food into his mouth, his camera bag slumped at his feet. They both looked up as she entered, their expressions a mixture of pity and awkwardness, before quickly looking back down to their plates. The humiliation was a physical force, so precise and exquisitely cruel, it stole the... The week after the wedding, Olivia didn't sleep. She existed in a state of suspended animation, fueled by industrial-strength coffee and a fury so pure and cold it felt like a new form of energy. While Jason and Vanessa were posting artfully filtered photos from their Maldivian bungalow, #blessed, #honeymoon, #new beginnings, Olivia was methodically beginning an excavation. She was digging into the bedrock of the company she had helped build, not with a shovel, but with the surgical precision of a forensic accountant. She wasn't looking for a simple mistake or a rounding error. She was looking for a conspiracy. Her office, usually a sanctuary of order and logic, became a war room. The blinds were drawn against the world. The only light came from the sickly green glow of her dual monitors, casting long, distorted shadows across the piles of financial reports that carpeted her desk. The hum of the server outside her door was a monotonous battle hymn. She maintained a professional facade during the day, a seamless mask of the competent, unflappable CFO. She approved payroll, took calls from suppliers, and projected a sense of absolute normalcy. But when the rest of the staff left, when the building fell into a sterile silence, her real work began. She didn't start with the major accounts. The Caldwells were too smart for that. A large, unexplained transaction would trigger alarms, invite scrutiny. Their corruption, she suspected, would be more insidious. It would be a cancer in the books, not a gunshot wound. So she started with the small things, the little details Vanessa had so dismissively mentioned. She ran a search for all invoices paid over the last 36 months that fell just under the $50,000 threshold that required a secondary board-level review, a policy she herself had implemented to streamline operations, a bitter irony that now tasted like poison. Hundreds of entries populated her screen. To a casual observer, they looked legitimate. Expedited material sourcing, on-site logistics consulting, geotechnical surveying fees. They were paid to a dozen different vendors, all with innocuous corporate-sounding names: Apex Solutions, Keystone Consulting, Summit Logistics. But as Olivia dug deeper, she found the rot. None of these companies had a digital footprint beyond a basic registration. No websites, no professional listings, and no physical addresses, only P.O. boxes in Delaware and Wyoming. They were ghosts, shells. For 72 hours, she barely moved, tracing the flow of money. It was a deliberately convoluted path designed to frustrate and exhaust anyone who tried to follow it. Payments were funneled from Matthews Construction to Apex, then from Apex to Summit, then split and rerouted through two more entities before finally landing in a single consolidated holding account with a private wealth management firm in the Cayman Islands. The name of the holding company was JVC Enterprises. JVC. Jason and Vanessa Caldwell. It was so arrogant, so brazen, it made her feel physically ill. With the growing sickness in her stomach, she cross-referenced the dates of the largest transfers with Jason's personal life. A $48,000 payment to Keystone Consulting coincided with the week he bought Vanessa a Cartier watch as an early anniversary gift. A series of 5 payments, totaling nearly $250,000, corresponded with the down payment on the sprawling new house they had purchased 3 months before the wedding. It was a slush fund, a secret dowry paid from the coffers of the company she had bled for, all to finance Jason's masquerade as a man of independent means for his new, wealthier-than-God in-laws. Over 2 years, the total came to just under $3 million. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that would confirm the depth of the betrayal, remained. Who had authorized the transfers? She pulled the digital authorizations, her hand trembling as she navigated the secure server. She expected to see Jason's signature, a forgery, something she could fight. What she found was worse. On every single transfer, every fraudulent invoice, every stolen dollar was the crisp, familiar signature of the one man she had always, on some fundamental level, trusted to have her back, the architect of the company and the architect of her pain. Thomas Matthews, CEO. A cold, hollow space opened up in her chest. This wasn't just Jason being weak and the Caldwells being predatory. This was a family conspiracy. Her own father had not only known about the theft, he had signed off on it. He had actively participated in looting his own company to prop up his favored son. The weight of it was suffocating. Every late night she had ever worked, every personal sacrifice she had ever made, every battle she had fought for a better interest rate or a more favorable contract term, it all felt like a fool's errand. She had been diligently filling a bucket while her father and brother were drilling holes in the bottom. She printed everything: the bank statements, the transfer authorizations, the timelines. She organized them into a binder. The crisp, professional presentation a stark contrast to the emotional chaos raging inside. She drove to her parents' house, the familiar tree-lined streets of her childhood now feeling like a foreign country. She found her father in his home study, the room he taught her to read a balance sheet, the room that smelled of old leather, wood smoke, and what she now recognized as regret. A glass of whiskey, nearly full, trembled in his hand. He looked up as she entered, and the expression on his face was not of shock or anger, but a weary, profound resignation. He knew why she was there. "I was wondering when you'd find this," he sighed, his voice raspy. Olivia didn't speak. She walked to the magnificent mahogany desk, the desk that had always symbolized his power and authority, and placed the binder squarely in the center. The soft thud of the plastic hitting the wood was the only sound in the room. He stared at it, then at her, the whiskey sloshing in his glass. Olivia finally said, her voice shaking with a cold, contained fury, "It's embezzlement, Dad. $3 million. Jason has been stealing from the company we built. You let him." "It's not stealing, it's an investment," he shot back, a flash of his old fire animating his tired features. He pushed himself up straighter in his leather chair, trying to regain some of his lost authority. "Do you have any idea what this alliance means? The Caldwells are a dynasty. This isn't just a marriage, it's a merger. It secures our future, the Matthews legacy for generations. That money was the cost of admission, Liv, a small price to pay." A merger? The word hung in the air between them, heavy and poisonous. Olivia felt the floor drop out from under her. It was worse than she had imagined. Thomas finally broke. The fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a frail, desperate old man. He sank back into his chair, the picture of defeat. The truth, when it came, was a torrent of fear and rationalization. The doctors, they gave me a year, maybe less. The cancer is back. It's aggressive. I lie awake at night, terrified of what happens to all of this, to my life's work when I'm gone. A flicker of sympathy, unwanted and unwelcome, pierced through Olivia's anger. He was dying. But the sympathy was extinguished by what he said next. Richard Caldwell came to me. He offered me a lifeline, a way out. He spoke of a full acquisition, cleverly disguised as a merger of equals. Caldwell Properties would absorb Matthews Construction. The Matthews name would live on as a prestige brand under their umbrella. Jason, my charming, incompetent brother, would be installed as an executive vice president, a figurehead with a 7-figure salary. The family would be financially secure forever. It was his magnus opus, the final deal to secure his legacy. Olivia stood frozen, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The wedding, the seating chart, the condescension. It was all part of the acquisition strategy. Soften the target, isolate the threats. "And me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Where do I fit into your grand design, Dad?" Her father couldn't meet her eyes. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his gaze fixed on the swirling vortex. "Richard, he's a practical man. He feels there's redundancy in the..."
Emotion was a liability. Strategy was an asset. This was the first lesson Olivia had learned at Wharton, a mantra beaten into her through case studies of failed companies and fallen executives. For the 48 hours after she walked out of her father's study, leaving him drowning in his own weakness, Olivia clung to that mantra like a drowning woman to a life raft. The pain was a physical presence, a giant, jagged hole in her chest where her trust in her family used to be. But to indulge it, to let the grief and betrayal overwhelm her, would be to surrender. And Olivia Matthews had never surrendered in her life. She retreated to her fortress of solitude, her private office at the far end of the executive floor. It was a space she had designed herself, minimalist, functional, with a single, massive window overlooking the city skyline, a constant reminder of the tangible world she helped to build. Here, amidst the clean lines and cool tones of gray and steel, she could compartmentalize. She could take the searing agony of her father's confession and her brother's complicity, pack it into a lead-lined box, and shove it into the deepest recess of her mind. There would be time for mourning later. Now was the time for war. Her first move was not offensive, but defensive. She initiated a full, encrypted backup of the company's servers to a private, secure cloud service she controlled. Every email, every invoice, every contract, every blueprint, every single byte of data that constituted the digital soul of Matthews Construction was duplicated and secured. It was the act of a CFO anticipating a hostile takeover, a quiet preparation for the corporate equivalent of salting the earth. With the company's memories safe, she turned her attention to her primary weapon. In her private safe, behind a framed photo of her and a much younger, happier-looking Jason at the groundbreaking of their first major project, was a leather-bound binder. It contained the executed originals of their top 10 most important contracts. She pulled out the thickest one: exclusive construction and development partnership agreement between Matthews Construction, Inc. and Caldwell Properties, LLC. Her hands were steady as she turned the pages, the crisp paper cool beneath her fingertips. She had negotiated this contract herself 3 years prior. She remembered the long, grueling sessions in the Caldwell Properties boardroom, a space so ostentatiously opulent it felt like a parody of wealth. Richard Caldwell had sat at the head of a comically long marble table, flanked by a team of smirking lawyers who looked like they'd been bred in a lab for corporate savagery. He'd treated the negotiation as a formality, a tedious bit of paperwork before the real partnership could begin. He'd been dismissive of her meticulous attention to detail,
waving away her concerns with a magnanimous, patronizing air. "Olivia, my dear," he had said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we're about to be family. Let's not get bogged down in these dreary what-ifs. Trust me, we will all be taken care of." But Olivia never operated on trust when it came to business. She operated on ink. She had pushed, politely but relentlessly, for tighter definitions, clearer deliverables, and stronger protections. Her own father had grown impatient with her. "For God's sake, Liv, you're going to insult the man," he'd muttered during a break. "Sign the deal." She hadn't. Not until they agreed to her terms. Now her finger traced the lines of the clause she had fought for the hardest, the one Richard's lawyers had called overly aggressive and entirely unnecessary. Section 17. Termination for cause. Subsection C. In the event of a material breach, including but not limited to gross financial misconduct, actions constituting a breach of fiduciary duty, or the initiation of undisclosed merger or acquisition activities by either party that would fundamentally alter the control or operational independence of the other, this agreement may be terminated with immediate effect upon 30 days' written notice. Such notice requires only the signature of the chief executive officer or the chief financial officer of the terminating party. There it was, the kill switch. Her signature was enough. She had the legal authority to sever the contract that was the linchpin of the Caldwell's entire expansion plan. A smile, thin and sharp, touched her lips for the first time in days. Richard Caldwell, in his arrogant dismissal of her, had handed her the very gun she now aimed at his head. But a weapon was useless without an army, or at least a loyal battalion. Pulling the trigger would send shockwaves through their own company as well. 40% of their current projected revenue was tied to Caldwell projects. She needed to know who would stand with her when the wall started to shake. She couldn't risk approaching the board. Too many of them were her father's old friends, men who operated on handshakes and sentiment. She needed the people who actually built the company day by day. She needed the lifers. Her first and only choice was Sam Torres, head of operations. Sam had started with her father 30 years ago as a laborer and had worked his way up through sheer force of will and competence. He was a burly, barrel-chested man with hands like leather work gloves and a gaze as steady and direct as a surveyor's level. His loyalty wasn't to the Matthews name. It was to the integrity of the work. She didn't call him. She drove to a small, nondescript coffee shop in a neighboring town, a place with worn linoleum floors and the smell of burnt coffee, miles from their usual orbit. She texted him the address and a simple message. "Urgent, need your advice." He arrived 10 minutes later, still in his work boots and dusty jeans, his presence filling the small booth. He looked at her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Liv, you look like hell. What's wrong?" She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a thin folder across the table. It didn't contain the embezzlement proof. That was too dangerous. It contains a single sheet of paper, a high-level summary of the proposed merger, focusing on the planned dissolution of Matthews Construction as an independent entity and the termination of over 60% of their core operational and administrative staff, including Sam himself. "They're selling us out, Sam," she said, her voice low and even. "My father, Jason, the Caldwells. They're planning to let Caldwell Properties acquire us. The company we know will be gone within 6 months. Most of our people will be gone with it." Sam read the document, his expression hardening from concern to a slow-burning anger. He read it twice, then pushed it back across the table. He was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held the answers. "I knew it," he finally said, his voice a low growl. "I knew something was rotten. The Caldwell projects. They're a nightmare. All flash, no foundation. They push for cheaper materials, cut corners on safety protocols, treat our guys like dirt. I've been bringing it up to your father for months, and he just tells me to make it work. Now I know why. He wasn't building, he was staging a house for sale." He finally met her eyes, his own dark with fury. "What's the play, Olivia?" "I'm going to stop them. I have a way to terminate the Caldwell contract, but it'll be a firestorm. It'll mean a short-term hit to our revenue, chaos, uncertainty. I need to know who's coming with me when I like the match. Sam didn't hesitate. The field supervisors, the project managers, the core crew leaders, they trust you. You're the one who fought for their bonuses last year when your dad and Jason wanted to cut them. You're the one who approved the new safety equipment. They know who keeps the paychecks coming and who keeps them safe. You have them. Just tell us when. The relief was so profound it almost buckled her. Sam's support wasn't just tactical, it was moral. He was the soul of the company. With him on his side, she wasn't just a disgruntled executive. She was leading a rebellion to save the company's integrity. Her next meeting was with Emily Reeves, their sharp, ambitious marketing director. I caught her as she was leaving for the day. "A minute, Emily?" Emily's support would be crucial for managing the external narrative when the bomb dropped. In Emily's office, with the door closed, Olivia laid out a more tailored version of the story, focusing on the branding implications. The merger plan involves phasing out the Matthews name entirely within 2 years. We'd be nothing more than a historical footnote on the Caldwell Properties website. Emily, who had spent the last 5 years building the Matthews brand into a symbol of quality and reliability, looked aghast. "Are you serious? After all the work we've done? The Caldwell's marketing team has been impossible. They treat us like a regional subsidiary they're doing a favor? They vetoed every one of our proposals for the joint campaign, calling them unsophisticated." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with professional indignation. "What are you planning, Olivia? Because whatever it is, I'm in. I'd rather go down fighting for our brand than let those smug peacocks absorb it." With her internal flank secured, she moved to the most audacious and critical part of her strategy. Simply blowing up the Caldwell deal wasn't enough. A good strategist doesn't just win a battle, they have a plan for the peace that follows. She couldn't let her move, however justified, cripple the company she was trying to save. She needed a safe landing. She needed a new partner, ready and waiting in the wings. There was only one real candidate: Norton International, their biggest and most respected competitor. Its CEO, Michael Norton, was everything Richard Caldwell wasn't. An engineer by training, obsessed with innovation, and famously ethical. For years, a quiet professional rivalry existed between them, a mutual respect for two companies that built things to last. Norton had tried to partner with them on several projects, but her father's fierce, almost irrational loyalty to the Caldwells had always been the roadblock. Securing a confidential meeting was a delicate dance. She used her personal email, reaching out.
The air in the Matthews construction boardroom on Monday morning was thick with a toxic cocktail of confusion, tension, and impending doom. The long, polished mahogany table, usually a symbol of stability and consensus, felt more like a dueling ground. Olivia had scheduled the emergency meeting for 9 a.m. sharp, a deliberately provocative time. It was the exact moment Jason and Vanessa were due to make their triumphal return to the office, a detail she had gleaned from her mother's gushing weekend emails. She hadn't just planned a corporate action, she had choreographed a confrontation. She stood at the head of the table, a position usually reserved for her father. Today, it was hers by right. She was calm, her movements measured, her face an impassive mask that betrayed none of the turbulent emotions churning beneath. She had dressed for battle in a charcoal gray suit, the severe lines a stark contrast to the celebratory attire she had last seen her family in. On the table before each board member was a simple, unmarked folder. Her father, Thomas Matthews, sat to her right, his face a sallow gray, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and fear. He had tried to cancel the meeting, his voice on the phone a weak imitation of his former authority. "Olivia, whatever this is, it can wait. You don't understand what's at stake." "Oh, I think I do, Dad. That's why it can't wait. See you at 9. The other board members, a collection of her father's oldest friends and business associates, men who had built their careers on loyalty and the old boys network, shifted uncomfortably in their high-backed leather chairs. They looked from Thomas's thunderous expression to Olivia's glacial calm. Sensing they were caught in the crossfire of a family war they didn't understand.
Sam Torres and Emily Reeves sat at the far end of the table, their faces grimly resolute, a silent chorus of support. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Olivia began, her voice cutting through the tense silence with the clean, sharp edge of a scalpel. "I've called this meeting under the CFO's authority as outlined in our corporate bylaws to address urgent and credible threats to the financial stability and structural integrity of this corporation." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. "Please open the folders in front of you." A collective rustle of paper filled the room. Inside, Olivia had placed two documents. The first was a high-level summary of the embezzlement scheme, detailing the $3 million figure, the shell corporations, and the timeline, conspicuously omitting the names of the guilty parties for now. The second was the draft of the Caldwell Properties merger agreement she had found on her father's computer, with the key clauses highlighted in yellow: the dissolution of the Matthews brand, the termination of the board, the elimination of dozens of key positions. A low murmur rippled through the room as the board members read, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock and then to outrage. Ellen Wright, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who was the only other woman on the board and its most diligent member, was the first to speak. "Olivia, is this verified? $3 million unaccounted for, and a secret merger that effectively sells the company for parts?" "It is all verified," Olivia confirmed, "and I have the complete unredacted documentation to support every claim." "This is outrageous, Thomas. What the hell is this?" Before her father could formulate a response, the boardroom doors burst open with a dramatic flourish. Jason strode in, tan, beaming, and utterly oblivious. He was the picture of a conquering hero returning from a distant shore. On his arm was Vanessa, radiating a smug, proprietary glow, and behind them, like a shark trailing a school of dolphins, was Richard Caldwell, his face wreathed in a triumphant smile. "Sorry we're late," Jason boomed, his voice filling the suddenly silent room. "The traffic from the airport was a nightmare, but we wanted to be here to announce the great news in person with the whole family." Richard Caldwell stepped forward, clapping Jason on the back. "Indeed, we're not ones for stuffy press releases. We believe big news should be shared face to face. Gentlemen, Ellen, we're here to formalize the merger between our two great family companies, a new era for us all." The three of them stood there, smiling, poised for a round of applause that never came. Instead, they were met with a wall of stunned, hostile silence. The board members stared from the damning documents in their hands to the smiling, clueless trio in the doorway. The disconnect was so profound, so jarring, it was almost comical. Jason's smile began to falter as he took in the atmosphere of the room. He saw the grim faces of the board, his father's ashen complexion, and Olivia standing at the head of the table like a hanging judge. "Liv, what's going on?" he asked, a note of confusion creeping into his voice. "What is this?" Olivia let the silence stretch, forcing him to absorb the full weight of the room's hostility. "This," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "is a board meeting, Jason. We were just discussing your great news. Specifically, this secret merger that, according to the draft Richard provided my father, would render this board obsolete, dissolve our company into a powerless subsidiary, and eliminate most of our key employees, including nearly everyone at this table." She let her gaze sweep across the faces of the board members, then land back on her brother. "And we were also discussing the $3 million that were embezzled from our operating accounts to fund this courtship." The color drained from Jason's face. He looked wildly from Olivia to his father to Richard, his mind clearly struggling to process the sudden, catastrophic shift in the script. "Liv, what are you doing? This is for the best. Dad agreed. We all agreed." "Did we?" Olivia countered, her voice dangerously soft. She turned her attention to the board. "Did any of you agree to have your positions eliminated? Did you agree to have the company you've guided for decades dismantled without your consent? Did you agree to have our profits siphoned off to furnish a lifestyle for my brother? Now see here, Richard, Caldwell blustered, stepping forward to take control. This is a private family matter being hashed out in a very inappropriate venue. These are sensitive, high-level negotiations. It became a corporate matter, Richard, when you conspired with our CEO to defraud this company. And as of 8 a.m. this morning, it's a legal one. She picked up a remote and clicked it. The large screen behind her, usually reserved for quarterly presentations, flickered to life. Projected onto it in stark black and white was a single page. It was a copy of the formal termination notice, complete with her signature and the official corporate seal, which she had personally delivered to Caldwell Properties' legal department an hour earlier. Pursuant to Section 17, subsection C of our binding and legally executed contract, the exclusive partnership between Matthews Construction and Caldwell Properties is hereby terminated effective immediately due to gross financial misconduct and undisclosed merger activities. A 30-day transitional period will be observed as per the terms of the agreement. The effect was like a detonator had been triggered. The room exploded. Richard Caldwell looked as if he had been physically struck. His face went from flushed red to a sickly mottled white. "You can't do that," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "You can't do that," Jason shouted, finally finding his voice. He took a step towards Olivia, his fist clenched, but Sam Torres arose silently from his chair, a formidable, immovable object. Vanessa, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, grabbed Jason's arm. "What is she talking about? What contract? What termination?" Actually, she can. All eyes turned to Emily Reeves, who was rereading the highlighted clause in the merger document, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "I remember this negotiation. Thomas, you told us Olivia was being difficult, insisting on overly punitive clauses. It seems her foresight was rather prescient." She looked directly at Olivia. "As an officer of this corporation, you are well within your rights." The color drained completely from Richard Caldwell's face. He understood the implications instantly. 3 of his largest, most profile luxury developments were halfway through construction, their financing predicated on a guaranteed construction timeline with Matthews. Without them, he would be in material breach of his loan covenants and his pre-sale agreements with buyers. He was facing hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties. He was ruined. "Thomas," he roared, turning on his silent partner, "control your daughter. We have an agreement." "An agreement this board never saw and never would have approved," George yelled, slamming his hand on the table. The chaos escalated, voices rising in a cacophony of accusation and panic. It was Vanessa who finally cut through the noise. Her carefully constructed facade of the elegant, supportive wife crumbled, revealing the vicious, pragmatic predator beneath. She whipped around to face Jason, her eyes blazing with a contempt so pure it was terrifying. "You told me you had her under control," she shrieked, her voice stripped of all its polished cadence, becoming shrill and ugly. "You promised me she was a non-issue, a sad little spinster who could be managed." The aftermath of what the Matthews construction employees quickly and reverently dubbed the boardroom coup was not a clean, surgical victory. It was a detonation. And for days afterward, Olivia found herself navigating the debris, the sharp, twisted wreckage of personal relationships and the hazardous dust of corporate fallout. The boardroom had been the battlefield, but the war was far from over. It had simply fractured, splintering into a dozen smaller, more intimate conflicts. News of the terminated contract and the aborted merger spread through the industry with the speed of a wildfire. Caldwell Properties' stock, already teetering from over-leveraged expansion, didn't just drop, it plummeted off a cliff. Their much-hyped investor showcase, scheduled for that afternoon, became a funereal affair. Richard Caldwell, stripped of his bravado, tried to spin a tale of strategic realignment. But the investors, a notoriously unsentimental bunch, smelled blood in the water. They saw the truth for what it was, a catastrophic failure of leadership. The kingdom Richard had built on bluff and intimidation was beginning to crumble. But Olivia took no pleasure in the news. She was too busy trying to keep her own house from collapsing under the shockwaves. The moment the Caldwells were escorted out, she had transitioned from warrior to crisis manager. While her father and brother were consumed by their own private hells, she worked the phones, her voice a calm, reassuring anchor in a sea of chaos. She spoke personally to their top project managers, their key suppliers, and their most important non-Caldwell clients. "There has been a significant change in one of our strategic partnerships," she explained, her tone factual and devoid of drama. "Our commitment to our other projects remains absolute. There will be no disruption to your timeline." She was shoring up the foundations, one conversation at a time, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Internally, the company was a hive of rumor and anxiety. She called an all-hands meeting that afternoon, standing before her employees, her father's empty chair beside her a stark symbol of the new order. She was honest but careful, framing the events as a necessary move to protect the company's long-term independence and integrity. "Matthews Construction is not for sale," she declared, her words echoing through the tense silence. "Not now, not ever." The statement was met with a wave of relieved, if hesitant, applause. She had stanched the bleeding, but she knew the internal wounds were deep. The deepest wounds, however, were not corporate. They were in her own home, a place that now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a field hospital after a brutal battle. Her mother, Margaret, had been at a charity luncheon during the boardroom confrontation. She arrived home that evening to find her husband collapsed in his study, his breathing shallow, and her son sitting catatonically in the living room, staring at a blank television screen. Margaret's grief and fear, finding no purchase on the intangible specter of cancer, needed a villain. It found one in Olivia.
"1 year is not a long time. It is 365 rotations of the earth, a cycle of seasons, a series of fiscal quarters. But in the life of the Matthews family and the company that bore their name, the year that followed the boardroom coup was transformative. It was a period of slow, painful rebuilding, like clearing a demolition site brick by painstaking brick, sorting the salvageable from the rubble, and beginning the arduous process of laying a new foundation. The corporate recovery was the most straightforward. Olivia, unshackled from the dead weight of the Caldwell partnership and her father's conservative, old-world business style, proved to be an even more brilliant and visionary leader than anyone had imagined. Her emergency alliance with Norton International blossomed into a full, dynamic partnership. Michael Norton, true to his word, proved to be a partner who valued her intellect and vision. Together, they pushed Matthews Construction into new, more profitable sectors: sustainable building, advanced materials science, and large-scale public infrastructure projects. The company's reputation, once merely regional, grew into a national symbol of resilience, quality, and ethical business practice. The story of Olivia's coup became a quiet legend in the industry, a case study whispered about in business schools, a testament to how integrity, when paired with strategic genius, could be the most potent weapon of all. The family recovery was a far messier, more complicated construction project. There were no blueprints for healing the wounds they had inflicted on one another. Thomas Matthews passed away 2 months after the confrontation, his body finally surrendering to the disease that had ravaged it for years. His last weeks were a blur of hushed hospital corridors,
hushed conversations, and the heavy weight of unspoken words. In the end, there was a quiet, fragile truth. Margaret allowed Olivia back into the circle of care, and the three of them, mother, son, and daughter, spent his final days as a fractured but present family. In one of his last lucid moments, he had clutched Olivia's hand, his eyes clear and focused. "Don't let my mistakes be your legacy," he had whispered. "Build something better." It was both a plea and a passing of the torch. His will contained no surprises, only a formalization of the new reality. He left his controlling shares and his position as chairman of the board to Olivia, a final, public acknowledgement of her true role. Jason received a significant but non-controlling block of shares, securing his financial future but removing him from any position of ultimate authority. The rest was left to Margaret. It was a clean, logical division, yet it felt like the final aftershock of the earthquake Olivia had triggered. The funeral was a massive affair, a testament to the respect her father had commanded in the community. As Olivia stood to deliver the eulogy, looking out over a sea of solemn faces, she didn't speak of his business acumen or his famous deals. She spoke of the man who taught her how to ride a bike, who smelled of sawdust and coffee, who believed in building things that would outlast him. And as she spoke, she saw Jason in the front row, his face streaked with tears, and her mother watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. No longer hostile, but not yet warm. It was a start. The person who changed the most in the year that followed was Jason. Hitting bottom rock had been, paradoxically, the best thing that ever happened to him. Stripped of his title, his unearned wealth, and his toxic marriage, he was forced to confront the empty space at the core of his own identity. For months, he drifted, a ghost in the family home. He went to therapy, he read books, he spent long hours in the company archives, not looking at financials, but at old photographs and project files from the company's early days, trying to understand the foundation he had so carelessly helped to undermine. One day, 6 months after their father's death, he appeared in Olivia's office doorway. He looked thinner, but his eyes were clearer than she had ever seen them. The hollow charm was gone, replaced with a quiet, hesitant gravity. "I want to come back," he said, his voice devoid of its usual easy confidence. "Not as a VP, not as anything with a title. I want to learn the business, the real business, from the ground up. Let me start as a site assistant. Let me fetch coffee and carry rebar. I need to earn it, Liv. I need to earn my own self-respect." Olivia was skeptical. She suspected it was another fleeting phase, but she saw a flicker of something real in his eyes, a desperate sincerity. She agreed, against her better judgment, giving him a post on a small commercial renovation project, reporting to one of her toughest, most no-nonsense site foremen. To everyone's astonishment, Jason thrived. He showed up early, he stayed late, he listened more than he talked. He learned the names of every crew member, their wives, their kids. He discovered that his natural gift was not for charming CEOs over steak dinners, but for connecting with people on a human level. He was the one who noticed when a drywaller's wife was sick and organized a collection. He was the one who could smooth over a dispute with the subcontractor, not with threats, but with a genuine understanding of their position. Slowly, project by project, he began to build something of his own, a reputation for being reliable, empathetic, and genuinely useful. He was earning his place, not because his name was on the building, but because his sweat was on the blueprints. Margaret's journey was quieter, more internal. After Thomas's death, the anger that had sustained her collapsed, leaving behind a profound, aching void. She rattled around the big, empty house, a queen without a kingdom. The charity luncheons and social events that had defined her life now felt hollow and meaningless. At Olivia's gentle urging, she took a more active role in the Thomas Matthews Charitable Foundation. At first, she simply signed checks, but then she started visiting the sites, the community centers, the vocational schools for at-risk youth that the foundation supported. She began to see the tangible legacy of her husband's work, a legacy that had nothing to do with stock prices or mergers. She saw it in the face of a young woman learning to be a welder, in the laughter of children at a new playground. For the first time, she was engaging with the soul of the company, not just its balance sheet. Her relationship with Olivia thawed slowly, moving from frosty silence to a tentative, formal politeness, and finally to something resembling a fragile, respectful peace. As for the Caldwells, their fall was as swift and brutal as their ambition. The termination of the Matthews contract triggered a cascade of defaults. Richard Caldwell, facing a barrage of lawsuits from investors and buyers, was forced into a fire sale of his assets. Caldwell Properties was carved up and sold for parts, its prestige brand becoming a punchline in the industry. Richard, disgraced and broke, retreated to a small condo in Arizona, a bitter, sunburnt King Lear with no kingdom left to rail at. Vanessa's fate was, in its own way, more tragic. Her divorce from Jason left her with a fraction of what she'd expected, her prenup holding firm against her lawyer's cynical attacks. Cut off financially by her father, who blamed her for failing to control the situation, and ostracized from the social circles that have been her entire world, she vanished. Rumors occasionally surfaced. She was a hostess at a restaurant in Los Angeles, a personal shopper in Scottsdale, a ghost haunting the fringes of the world she had once commanded. 1 year to the day after their father's death, Olivia hosted the first annual Thomas Matthews Memorial Scholarship Benefit. The grand ballroom of the city's finest hotel was filled with industry leaders, community partners, and Matthews employees past and present. It was a celebration not of profits, but of purpose. Olivia stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. Her mother was at the head table, engaged in an animated conversation with the young woman who was the first recipient of the scholarship. At the same table, Jason was deep in conversation with Michael Norton, sketching an idea on a cocktail napkin, his face alive with genuine passion. He had recently been promoted to Director of Client and Community Relations, a role Olivia had created for him, a perfect synthesis of his skills and his newfound purpose. As Olivia finished her speech, a waiter approached her. "Miss Matthews, there's a delivery for you at the service entrance." Curious, she made her way through the back of the ballroom, past the clatter of the hotel kitchen. At the loading dock, a woman stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, holding a small, wilting bouquet of carnations. She was thin and wore a threadbare coat. It took Olivia a moment to recognize her. It was Vanessa. I heard about the event," Vanessa said, her voice small and hesitant. She didn't look at Olivia, focusing instead on the grimy concrete floor. I wanted to say about your father. I'm sorry." She thrust the sad-looking flowers toward Olivia. "These are from the gas station. It's all I could afford." Olivia looked at the woman before her, the architect of her greatest humiliation,